Here they are. He was known for signaling the change in the beat by this. A secular genre of Cuban music involved dance, percussion, and song. 19th century mambo started mainly in the urban areas of Havana, and because Cuba held on to slavery longer than the rest of Latin America, a lot of its music is based on African music and dance traditions. Originally, mambo was danced in the streets, and it's become one of the most characteristic forms of music and dance from Cuba. A guy named Damaso Perez Prado added trumpets and saxophones, timbales and conga drums, and this new beat you heard. He moved from Cuba to Mexico, where his music took off, and then to the United States. Remember Cherry Pink, Apple Blossom White, or Patricia, or Tequila? Well, those were mambos, and it was followed later on by cha-cha-cha and merengue, about which you'll hear about next month. So let me say that surprisingly, no one was born on March 10th that's in our Rotary Club. Therefore, I'm going to introduce council member for March birthdays. No one was born on March 10th. That's in our club anyway. So let me introduce Matt Mahan. He joined us in 2018. He represents District 10. He was raised by working class parents, according to his bio, a school teacher and a letter carrier. He famously took a 4-hour round trip from Watsonville by bus to come to Bellarmine College Prep, where he worked on a work-study scholarship for low-income students. I'd say he did pretty well academically because he went from there to Harvard, where he was an honors student and a student body president, one of the leaders of an effort to end Harvard's investment in companies supporting the genocide in Darfur. He built irrigation systems for farmers in Bolivia, taught classes in the Allen Rock School District, coached the girls' soccer team, and kept his classroom open for students after school. He's had success in several businesses as a tech entrepreneur. He co-founded Brigade Group, a voter network with a nonpartisan platform for voters to discuss issues and candidates. And he tells me he sold that company to Pinterest and Countable, a software as a service company. And so now he's able to develop or dedicate all of his time and energies to District 10, which he won. It was an open seat when Johnny Camus was termed out. And he didn't have to run in last November's election. And he's been working since then, all ready to go. So welcome. Are you ready to tell us in 7 minutes all about your district?
I am. Thanks, Fernando. Appreciate it. Really, really good to be here. And I appreciate the mambo. My wife, Sylvia, is half Cuban. Her mother immigrated from Havana. So love the music. Nice to be here with you all. Thanks for having me. Glad to see our club alive and well. And I'm looking forward to one day being back in person with everyone. But really, really appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit. And Fernando did my background so well that it saves me some time. So I'll just jump into a little bit about why I ran. I will add that Sylvia and I live in the Santa Teresa Foothills neighborhood, which is part of District 10, obviously, and we're raising 2 little kids, Nina and Luke, who are ages 3 and 1. So we certainly have our hands full. And Sylvia, I'll just brag about quickly, is the incoming president of Cristo Rey High School now. She's just moved into that new job. So I wanted to share that with folks who are aware of the phenomenal work that Cristo Rey does here. For me personally, as Fernando mentioned, I've always been interested in community organizing and helping people come together to solve problems in their community, essentially. And when the civic tech company that I'd been working on for years, that was really a national platform for helping voters understand how their democracy works, when that was acquired, I thought that maybe the best way for me to continue that work would be to run for local office. And what drives me more than any single issue is really civic participation and building public trust in our institutions. There are a lot of important issues. I care passionately about education. I'm worried about climate change. When I knocked on 10,000 doors in District 10, I heard a lot about property crime and potholes and parks, the three Ps, they often call them: police, parks, and potholes. You can imagine the many local issues people bring up, and those are important as well. I'd say homelessness has quickly kind of risen to the top of the list, along with, of course, our COVID response. But to me, there's something below all of that, which is how our government operates, how it communicates, how it sets goals, how it measures its progress, how it reports to the public, its performance, and really how it builds trust. And so I'm going to just quickly, that's the stuff I care about. And with my background, both as a public school teacher, having worked in the community, but also as a technology entrepreneur and having built tools and invested in data and technology, I think I bring a fairly unique perspective to the council. And so if I am able to impact in any area, it would hopefully be on increasing transparency and accountability in local government. So I'm going to just quickly, and Fernando will tell me as I run out of minutes here, how much time I've left. But I want to just quickly share a few slides with you that outline what we're trying, some of the things that we're doing through our office. Some of them are maybe a little different than you've seen from other council members. So, I'm going to go through them quickly. If you want to see the slides, we'll share them so you can get them in your email inbox or whatever's convenient. So don't worry about reading all of the content. But the first thing we did, and of course, I've only been in office for about 2 months now, but our District 10 team set up a help center where residents can go to help.sjd10.com and get their answers to questions. They can submit a question. We create a ticket. We show them how long it takes us to respond. So it's a customer service portal. They can also see frequently asked questions and get the answers without having to wait for our staff to respond to them. So I borrowed that from my experience in the private sector. And again, all of this is in the spirit of trying to close the gap between residents and their local government. We've created a Chat with Matt series. Every 2 weeks, I do an hour, sort of like office hours, but we often have 75 people on the Zoom, and it's unscripted. It's totally unfiltered. People ask me their toughest questions. I give them my best answers, and we often follow up after the meeting on questions I'm unable to answer satisfactorily. Every week, we do a preview of our council meeting on Monday, the meeting's on Tuesday, and then Wednesday we record a summary of what happened for folks. You don't have to watch the meeting, you can get a quick summary of what's on the agenda. We spotlight local businesses, and especially with our COVID response, we've been trying to help people discover new and local businesses, locally owned businesses in our community. This was the one from this week. And we crowdsource from the community their suggestions. So it's not my favorite restaurant, it's the community's favorite spots. We've been doing an Inside City Hall series we've just launched, where we're bringing folks you might not otherwise meet who run different departments. This is Jim Shannon, our budget director, who will be coming out virtually, coming out to District 10 to share some insight into our budget process. We also have set up an annual survey so people can tell us how satisfied they are with their district office, and we can track that over time and get input on how our office could better serve the community and transparently show how we're performing. We, of course, as part of that survey, ask people what issues they care about. I mentioned crime, homelessness, maintaining our roads, supporting local businesses tend to be what we hear the most from our constituents down in District 10, at least at the local level. And we've partnered with some of our local community groups to help the community form working groups. So rather than just have community members complain to us, we're putting people to work. We're getting residents to form groups around issues they care about, and then we're staffing them. We're helping them do research, helping them learn more about the issue, meet with city staff, formulate their own policy ideas, and really trying to collaborate with groups of residents who want to see change in the community. Again, rather than just having them send us an email or give us a phone call and then we kind of give them a canned response and tell them to go away. We're inviting people into our office virtually again to help us actually work on these issues. These are just the first 7 groups that residents have formed. This was formed by the community. These weren't the issues I told them to care about. This is, as we were getting complaints and questions and concerns, we connected those constituents, and they've now formed groups around some very pertinent local issues you can see on the screen there. Council has a priority setting session that actually next week on the 15th, each council member gets to bring forward 2 priorities. And I want to just share for you quickly. I'm bringing forward a proposal for a citywide dashboard that would display our city level goals and KPIs, or key performance indicators, measures of how we're doing. We don't currently have city level goals. We have departmental goals, but we don't have quantifiable goals at the city level. What's most important for the city? What are we prioritizing? Where are we allocating resources? So I'd like to impose a little more of that structure on the city, if my colleagues agree, where we rank our goals and make them quantifiable, measurable, and actually report out on how we're doing. And then the other priority I'm bringing forward is a proposal for a more comprehensive encampment management strategy for our homeless encampments, especially thinking about protecting sensitive spaces such as creeks, parks, and schools. And then finally, I'll say you all have inspired us. Down in Almaden at the Allen Lake, we're working with our local Rotary Club to build a smaller but still, I think, wonderful all-inclusive playground at the lake. And if you're interested in that, we'd love to get you involved. So that's actually all I had in terms of slides. I just wanted to give you some examples of the ways in which we're trying to make the District 10 office really responsive to the community, very transparent and accountable to the community, and really use technology to improve governance. So that's kind of my initial vision, just 2 months into the job, but appreciate the opportunity to share that with you all and look forward to working with you all in the years ahead.
Well, thank you. Nice chat with Matt.
You
brought a lot of your technology in with us. Thanks very much. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Alfreda Egan from Ghana. She's a fellow Spartan and has an MBA from St. Mary's College in Moraga, was in corporate finance for 30 years before she retired. She's married and lives in Almaden. Her sponsor was Dennis Fong. In 3 minutes, Alfreda, please tell us all about yourself.
Oh, yeah. So thank you, Fernando. I'm really glad to be here and looking forward to meeting all of you. I live in Almaden Valley, happen to be in District 10. And I actually remember when Matt first started, I used to be with the Almaden Valley Women's Club. So it's nice to hear all the good things he's doing for our district. I live in Almaden Valley, as I said, with my husband, Abu. We've been married for 36 years and have 2 grown daughters. I migrated to the United States on a student visa and really decided to stay after school and proceeded, as Fernando said, to go to school, get an undergraduate and graduate degree, and also applied for all my siblings, my 3 siblings and my parents to also migrate to the United States. Actually, when my daughter was growing up, she said there were 2 words she always remembers hearing in the house, and one of them was green card and Charles Schwab. It was because I was going through the whole immigration application process, and I thought I could become an immigration lawyer after I finished that whole petition. So the green card was, of course, the end game of what we were applying for, and Charles Schwab because we had to show financial stability that we can support all the people who were petitioning for. So that's kind of how I came to the United States. And I proceeded to go to work in the high technology area, just like Matt. I work for a number of companies, including VMware, Citrix Systems, Symantec, and Veritas. I'm currently retired after over 25 years. My last role was really like Senior Director of Financial Planning and Analysis with VMware. And most of my focus was really with business and financial planning, as well as, making sure that we execute to the strategies and set up all the KPIs that Matt alluded to. We set all the KPIs, and I was responsible to make sure that we were aligned across the organization and keeping track of them and making sure that we hit the goals and course correct, not to wait before the end of the quarter to go and tell people that they didn't make their goals. So I'm here today. I spend most of my time as a Stanford Seed consultant, helping entrepreneurs in West Africa execute their transformation plans that they put together in the Stanford Seed program. So I like to play tennis, practice yoga, drink wine, and read, and also take long walks with my husband. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Alfreda. I think you can talk to the people in the International Services Committee. I think they could put you to good work. Next, we've got Scott Payne, who joined us in 1995 in the ELC, otherwise known as the Enterprise Leadership Conference. He's the chair of that committee, and later after him will be Randy Zeckman. So, Scott, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Hi, thank you, President Fernando. Appreciate the time. We wanted to give you a quick update on ELC. I think most of you are familiar with ELC, but for those that are new, ELC Enterprise Leadership Conference. It's a joint venture with San Jose's club and the two Los Gatos clubs, the morning and noon club. And we organize and market and get 96 high school juniors together for a 3-day conference and teach them about enterprise, teach them about how to put together a business. And they actually do in groups of 8, 4 boys and 4 girls. They start Wednesday morning and at noon on Friday give a business plan similar to a Sharks presentation, and it's amazing. We have a great committee. We have probably over 30 people active. Last year in March, we usually have that conference in March. Last year, we were very disappointed because of COVID that the conference was at the last minute canceled. It's down at Asilomar, and so that was very problematic. Jason Minsky was our esteemed chairman at the time, did a great job right up to the end, but we had to cancel. We also aren't having it this month, but we are active and we are planning to do an in-person Enterprise Leadership Conference next March. So we want you to all be aware of that, and we're going full steam ahead with that. Our committee is focusing on 2 things. We're meeting regularly and subcommittees. We have a main thrust on strategic planning. Jennifer Simmons is heading that. She's doing a great job, great subcommittee there, and we're trying to improve all aspects of ELC. And secondly, we have a great alumni association thrust going on that Tom Bondi originally started, and Tom and Randy Zeckman and their committee are doing right now. And so I want to pass it off to Randy to explain that.
Hey, thanks, Scott. So the Alumni Network for ELC, this organization's been around for 38 years. So we have actually 3,000 alumni that have attended ELC over the years, if you do the math on it. And we have lists going back to 2005. Unfortunately, we don't have them later than that for obvious reasons with handoffs to different chairs and lack of email before then. But we have 1,391 students that we have reached out to start this alumni network. So this year, this whole thing started because we were thinking about, are there a bunch of famous CEOs in Silicon Valley that got their business entree into this, into it from ELC? Like, was this their first business entree? And could those leaders mix with the future leaders of our valley? And do we have other business leaders? And might we even know some of them? So we actually do have one we're aware of. His name is Mick Greco. He's a San Jose Rotarian, for those who you don't know. He attended in the late 90s. So he's on our subcommittee for ELC with about a dozen other Rotarians. We also have 5 former alumni that are all under the age of 25 that are part of this alumni network. And we really see long-term value for ELC, for the alumni, for the future students, and for Rotary itself. You can imagine all the different things that can happen when you mix 38 years of folks that have attended something. So on February 25th, we had a successful launch. We did an exhaustive research on those 1,300 students. We sent them emails, texts, DGs reached out to former students, and we even reached out to their parents. Our goal was to get 150 students to attend. We got 174 that signed up. We had a speaker whose name is Art Norens, who spoke to our group before. He's a known, fairly well-known CEO around. And we had gave everyone a survey that participated. We got 80% participation. So we feel like we have a good idea of what everybody wants for this alumni network moving forward. Most importantly, what we got from that survey was 24 other alumni that say they want to help form the structure here. So in the future, what we see as I close up here, we see events every month. We have the next one scheduled for April, and we have speakers already scheduled. The alumni by this summer will be running it. There'll be network opportunities, career opportunities, mentoring, guest speakers. There'll be over 100 attendees at these events. And you know, the ELC network could really be a game changer, not only for Rotary, but also for the Valley itself, by connecting all these people. So if any of you have participated in ELC, we'd love any memorabilia you have, lists, that kind of thing. I'd love to connect to more people. And if any of you are interested in ELC, then please join our committee.
Sounds like that would be a good resource for new Rotarians as well. Thank you very much, Randy. And we look forward to hearing of your success. Thanks. I don't know how many of you have heard that Chris Wilder had a major stroke on this weekend. He had 2 surgeries to remove a blood clot. He's sedated for a week to let his brain rest. So you were given a Carrying Bridge link sent out by our executive director, Leslie Hamilton, and his brother Todd is keeping it updated. So you'll see the Carrying Bridge web link that she provided you. On this day in 1965, state troopers used nightsticks and tear gas to attack the American civil rights activists as they crossed the bridge in Selma, Alabama, in their attempted march to the state capitol in Montgomery. March is also Rotary Water and Sanitation Month. Our International Services Committee is working on that very subject. Clean water and sanitation is a human right, but not everyone's given that right. Rotary members are providing communities with sustainable access to safe water and improved sanitation. By the way, condolences to Matt Micheletti at the passing of his dad earlier last month. And there was a nice article, I don't know if you caught that, in the Mercury News with Andrea Urton. She's the CEO of Home First. Very interesting and thought-provoking article on her. Yesterday, your board approved 5 new members. 4 of them are women. And so far, we've had 15 women and 6 men join our club this year, while 7 have relocated or resigned for various reasons. Our membership numbers have declined 1.5%, which is amazing, which you consider the disruptions by this pandemic. We would have expected, and we had expected, something like a 10 or 11% drop in membership, but 1.5% is terrific. Dr. Karen Philbrook, who is in the membership committee, has formed what she calls a Circle of Recruitment Excellence Committee to recognize those Rotarians, other than Rod Diridon and Larry Stone, who excel in introducing the most new members to our club. And it comes with a very nice looking pin. As you know, this is March is Women's History Month. Last Monday was March 7th, was International Women's Day. In 1918, an unlikely band of American women volunteered to go to war-torn France, which included 6 doctors, 13 nurses, a dentist, a plumber, an electrician, a carpenter, and a mechanic. All women. This was the first wave of American women who built hospitals to help the Allied effort in World War I. They had an ulterior motive. They wanted to prove beyond a doubt that women were just as brave, just as competent, and just as self-sacrificing as men, and that they deserved to have a vote back home. The doctors offered their medical services to the US military first, but they were firmly rebuffed because they were women. In contrast, the desperate French welcomed them, along with whatever funding and supplies they could bring. And in all, 78 American women, doctors, and their assistants risked their lives under the National American Women's Suffrage Association banner in World War I, but their stories remain largely lost to history. But on Monday, International Women's Day, President Biden nominated 2 female generals to the position of 4-star combatant commanders, subject to Senate approval. And if they're confirmed, they will be only the 2nd and 3rd women in U.S. history to hold that position. So progress is slow, but it's coming. And we need to thank our Rotarians who have helped bring in more women and more minorities to our club, which is what we want to do to become more inclusive and more representative of our community that we serve. And I want to thank Jerry Greer and his Lindley Zink and Karen Philbrick as they head that committee of membership. But, you know, it's not just the membership committee that's invited to do this. Every one of us, every Rotarian is expected to extend the gift of Rotary, because it is a gift. It's not for everyone, but it is a wonderful gift for those who are able to participate in this activity. So next, I'd like to introduce Jim Towery. He joined Rotary in 2017. He was a former law partner of mine, and he was the former first dude and husband of past President Karen Sinanutari, and he's presently a Superior Court judge who will welcome and introduce our program speaker. Jim, are you ready to go?
I believe I am, President Fernando. Thank you. And a reminder to everybody, if you have questions for our speaker today, Judge Fogel, put your questions in the chat and we will pass them on to Judge Fogel, time permitting. Our speaker today is the Honorable Jeremy Fogel. Judge Fogel received his bachelor's degree from Stanford and his law degree from Harvard. After law school, he came to San Jose, where he became the founding director of the Mental Health Advocacy Project. He was appointed as a judge in 1981, and he enjoyed a 30-year career as a judge, first serving in the municipal court and later the Superior Court, and then being appointed as a federal district judge in the Northern District of California. As a federal judge, he handled a wide variety of cases, from cutting-edge technology cases to death penalty litigation. In 2011, Judge Fogel was appointed to serve as the director of the Federal Judicial Center in Washington. The FJC is a little known but very influential arm of the U.S. Supreme Court and has as its responsibility, among other things, the training and education of all federal judges. As leader of the FJC, Judge Fogel pioneered education on such diverse topics as mindfulness and implicit bias on the part of judges. In September of 2018, Judge Fogel became the first executive director of the Berkeley Judicial Institute, a center at Berkeley Law School. The mission of the Berkeley Judicial Institute, which by the way is a precedent-setting entity, does not exist anywhere else in the country. The mission is to promote an ethical, resilient, and independent judiciary. Judge Fogel is too modest to say this himself, but I can say with confidence that there is no individual in this country who is more qualified to address the issue of an independent judiciary than Judge Fogel. Please join me in welcoming Judge Jeremy Fogel.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much. It's very, very kind introduction. And I've been on here for a little while with my camera off and my mute on and just looking around the room. And there's so many familiar faces. There's so many people. It's really a joy to see. Some people I haven't seen for a very long time, but it is reminding me how important San Jose has been in my life. That even living in DC for the last 10 years and being involved in this project with the National Judiciary and doing the work I'm doing now at Berkeley, which actually is bi-coastal between DC and Berkeley. San Jose is where I spent, as Jim said, the first 37 years of my career. And it was where the things I care about became clear, where my values got formed. And it's a wonderful community, and it's good to see so many people who I met along the way and who were mentors and friends along the way. I want to talk about a very specific topic, and it's mentioned in the title, and that is how the center held, how the courts responded to the challenges of the last presidential election. And necessarily in doing this, I'm going to be talking about political things, but I want to stress at the outset that I really don't see this talk or the points I'm trying to make as being political. They're really more descriptive of what the role of the judiciary is in our constitutional form of government and how the judiciary's conduct during the election exemplified that. If you remember, go back to before the election, really almost the entire Trump administration, there was a lot of focus on the fact that the president was appointing young ideological judges, that they were people who were very conservative, they were very active in their conservatism, they were young and were going to stay in the federal courts for a long time. There was a vetting process that almost necessarily passed through the Federalist Society, which is an organization of judges who share similar views. And that was sort of meant to be a litmus test for people's judicial philosophy. There even was a point where some of the judges who were appointed were found not qualified by the ABA vetting process, not so much because they lacked intellectual ability, but just because they lacked experience. There were people who were appointed to lifetime federal positions who had been lawyers for seven or 8 years. And I think there was a great deal of fear about what these new judges were going to do and how they might affect the role of the judiciary nationally. And I think it's fair to say that there were also some hopes. It wasn't just fears. There were people who hoped that they would undo things that had been done over many, many decades of a certain type of judging. But in any event, I think there was a lot of feeling that these judges were different enough, that they were ideological enough, that they were young enough, committed enough, that they would actually really upset the apple cart. I think there was a lot of rhetoric to the effect that in the election, and of course this all was in the context of rhetoric about the election being rigged and the election being stolen and so forth, that those judges would vote in favor of the president no matter what. And in fact, there was this whole dialogue that took place when Justice Barrett was going through the confirmation process, that it was very important to get her confirmed quickly so that she would be able to hear cases that arose from the presidential election. And then the president made that point a number of times. And so particularly among non-judges or non-lawyers, people outside the legal world, I think there was a lot of concern. Well, could that really happen? Is that really the way this works? And I think even within the legal world, there were concerns along those lines. So the election happened, and we know that there were a number of states that had close votes. They were hotly contested. There were claims made about irregularities in the way people voted and the way votes were counted. And of course, we remember the press conference that Mayor Giuliani had at the Four Seasons Landscaping parking lot in Philadelphia, where they talked about this strategy they had of upending the results in these states based on massive irregularities. The first case that really joined the issues, it was the first high-profile case that could significantly affect the outcome of the election, was filed in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. It was filed in the Middle District of Pennsylvania in the district court. And it was a challenge to the way that votes were being counted in Pennsylvania. And it was a statewide challenge. And at that point, it was only 3 days after the election. And it was unclear, Biden was ahead, it was unclear how much he would end up winning by. And there certainly was no indication as to how this particular legal challenge would come out. The case was assigned to Judge Matthew Brann. Judge Brann was appointed by President Obama, but he is a very conservative Republican judge and a very prominent member of the Federalist Society in Pennsylvania. He was appointed as part of a deal involving the two senators in Pennsylvania, Senator Toomey, who's a Republican, and Senator Casey, who's a Democrat. and they agreed that they would sign off on each other's appointments, give blue slips, they call them, approval of the district court nominees. It was a courtesy between the two of them. So Judge Brand, who I actually met when he was a brand new federal judge and was one of the teachers in his baby judge class, very conservative guy, and he was the person who drew the case. So here's the first test of the proposition that it matters what the politics of these people are. It matters who appointed them. It matters that's all going to factor into the way they deal with a case as important as an election challenge. And Judge Brand was very, jumped right on it. He had a full afternoon of oral argument. He had very quick briefing schedule. He took the case extraordinarily seriously, which didn't surprise me in the least. And he had everybody come in. He gave them a lot of time to argue. He asked a lot of questions. He was very, very well prepared. After the hearing, he said, I'm going to give you a chance to amend your complaint so that you can put in everything in there that could possibly make a difference. And so then they do that. And then after it's all said and done, he issues this opinion that could only be called scathing. He totally rejects the campaign's claims. He denies them leave to amend their complaint. And it's really interesting reading what he said, because it kind of goes to the point I want to make. This is just quoting directly from his decision. He said, in this action, the Trump campaign and the individual plaintiffs seek to discard millions of votes legally cast by Pennsylvanians from all corners, from Greene County to Pike County and everywhere in between. In other words, plaintiffs asked this court to disenfranchise almost 7 million voters. This court has been unable to find any case in which a plaintiff has sought such a drastic remedy in the contest of an election in terms of the sheer volume of votes asked to be invalidated. One might expect that when seeking such a startling outcome, a plaintiff would come formidably armed with compelling legal arguments and factual proof of rampant corruption, such that this court would have no option but to regrettably grant the proposed injunctive relief, despite the impact it would have on such a large group of citizens. That has not happened. Instead, this court has been presented with strained legal arguments without merit and speculative accusations, unpled in the operative complaint and unsupported by evidence. In the United States of America, this cannot justify the disenfranchisement of a single voter, let alone all the voters of its sixth most populated state. Our people, laws, and institutions demand more. At bottom, plaintiffs have failed to meet their burden to state a claim upon which relief may be granted. I therefore grant defendants' motions and dismiss plaintiff's action with prejudice. So he's not leaving them any room, and he's making it very, very clear that he's not having any part of this. So he didn't just rule against the campaign, but he did so in a very emphatic way. The campaign appealed the case to the Third Circuit, which is the Court of Appeals that oversees appeals from Pennsylvania. And they take briefing. He draws a all-Republican panel. It's chaired by the Chief Judge, Brooks Smith, who's from Altoona, Pennsylvania, in the very conservative middle part of the state. Michael Chigares, who was appointed by President Bush, and Stefanos Bibas, who was appointed by President Trump, and who was one of the sort of iconic Trump appointees. He was appointed early. He had been a law professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He was one of a hero among conservatives for his scholarly work, very prominent member of the Federalist Society. So it was a real seriously conservative panel. The matter was taken under submission, and they promptly affirmed Judge Brand in all respects. And Judge Bibas writes the opinion. And I'm just going to quote one short excerpt from it. It's worth reading the whole thing. He says, free, fair elections are the lifeblood of our democracy. Charges of unfairness are serious, but calling an election unfair does not make it so. Charges require specific allegations and then proof. We have neither here. So, you look at the assignment of the case to one of the more conservative district judges in Pennsylvania. You say, well, I wonder what's going to happen. You look at who the panel is on the Court of Appeals. You wonder what's going to happen. You look at who's writing the majority opinion. You look at what's going to happen. And what happened is that these judges not only rejected the campaign's claims, but they did so with great emphasis on the rule of law. And I'll talk about some of the core principles there in just a second. But all of them, at the end of the day, cared much more about who they were as judges and what it means to be a judge in our country than they did about who won the case. And if you looked around the country, there were challenges in many other states, in Wisconsin and in Arizona and in Georgia. And the results were very similar. You had democratically appointed and Republican appointed judges doing very similar things and reaching very similar results with similar conclusions. One of the more interesting people in this drama, and I'll say more about him in a second, is a guy named Brian Hagedorn, who is a Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin. And Wisconsin is a state that elects its judges on a partisan basis, even to the Supreme Court. And Justice Hagedorn was elected to the Supreme Court of Wisconsin in a very close election, a very expensive election where he was the conservative candidate. And he ended up casting the decisive vote in the Wisconsin Supreme Court to reject the claims of the Trump campaign of fraud. So I'll come back to that in a second. And then finally, the Supreme Court hearing in the Texas case, the one that was joined in by a number of state attorneys general. The president, then President Trump, made a claim that this is the big one. This is the one that's going to vindicate our position. This is the one that's going to restore the stolen election to us. And 158 or so members of the House join, and the case is promptly and unanimously rejected by the Supreme Court. There were 2 votes by Justice Thomas and Justice Alito, not to do anything on the merits, but that was a sort of a very arcane argument about original jurisdiction, and they made clear that they disagreed with the majority about the jurisdictional question, but not about whether there should be any relief granted. So, and that was, and notably Justices Gorsuch and Barrett and Kavanaugh were among the 9 and among the 7 who said, and then there's nothing here and we're not going there. So what's going on here? I mean, this is not what the popular version of this would be. This is not what you'd read about on Twitter. This is judges being judges and doing what judges do. But what is that? You ask people, is the judiciary really independent? Is the judiciary really free from political influence? And I think there are 2 extreme positions that both have a certain following. I think they're both wrong. One of them is the one that's sort of caricatured. It's the judges or umpires, they call balls and strikes. And unfortunately, and I think he has since made clear that that's not really the full substance of what he was trying to say. Chief Justice Roberts said that in his confirmation hearing back in 2005. But he has since said, even in baseball, umpires have different strike zones. Not every umpire sees the strike zone the same way. So yes, judges are calling balls and strikes, but there's not some transcendent strike zone that every judge sees, and that there's no your background and your life experience and your orientation and the things that matter to you or any of your principles. Nobody can really argue seriously that those things don't affect judicial decision making, particularly in close cases. But that's one of the extreme positions, is that judges just call balls and strikes. There is another extreme position, which is that judges just do whatever they want. That judges are political creatures who simply decide what they want to do, what result they want to reach, based on their political and philosophical leanings, and then they work back from the result and they write opinions that reflect some type of legal reasoning. I think that's wrong too. And I think we saw in the election cases exactly how that's wrong. There is a legal culture. There is a set of values, a set of anchors that every judge who takes the job seriously, I'm not saying every judge who ever lived, but every judge who takes the job seriously understands and to some extent tries to honor. And of course, no one's perfect. People honor it in varying degrees of success. And of course, who you are and your temperament and your orientation and your background and your philosophy and all of those things make a difference. But there are three things that I think define this legal culture. And one of them, and it came through in what we heard from Judge Brand and Judge Bibas, is that evidence matters, right? I mean, this is an evidence-based process. You can't just kind of come into court and make a sweeping claim about something and not have any evidence. Evidence matters. And what mattered in all of these election cases was that there just wasn't evidence presented that began to carry the burden of proof for the kind of relief that was being sought. You might show an irregularity here, an irregularity there, but if you're talking about throwing out thousands or even millions of votes, you have to do more than that. And that's one of the anchors of the judicial culture. It's one of the anchors of the judicial process. And so despite all of the political turmoil and all of the noise and all of the tweeting and all of the late night TV and everything else, all of the judges who had these cases showed some real clarity in terms of that being something that matters. There has to be evidence. There's also this notion of due process. You can't say you have evidence and then not bring it into court. I mean, you can't just say, well, if you just give us a chance, we'll show you. There were some really things, I think, to the lawyers and judges in the audience, these are kind of funny. Well, I don't have any evidence now, Your Honor, but if you give me some time, I'll bring some in. And there were actually a number of colloquies that occurred in some of these election cases where that's what the campaign's lawyer said. And they acknowledged that they didn't have any evidence, but they said that they would produce it if they were given an injunction and if the certification of the ballots was stopped. So there's that aspect of due process. And then finally, there is the notion of ethics, that when you become a judge and you take an oath to apply the law without fear or favor and without being influenced by public clamor and sympathy, every judge takes an oath that's more or less, that's the substance of it. And I think we can say with some pride that the great majority of judges in our country, both state and federal, take that seriously. Now, we may not like every decision that they make. We may disagree profoundly with some of the decisions that they make, but there is a process, there is a culture. And when you become a judge and when you develop some pride in yourself as a judge, part of what that pride is about is honoring those values, honoring those principles. And so I think that's what the truth is. I mean, that's between these extremes of, judges being completely impartial and judges being political animals. There's a place in the middle where judges strive to be evidence-based, they strive to be fair, and they strive to be ethical. So I already quoted from Judge Brand and Judge Bibas, and I think they both called out those principles specifically. I mentioned I would come back to Justice Hagedorn for a second. I mean, as they say, this is a state that has partisan elections. He ran as a conservative Republican. He's elected as a conservative Republican. And then he gets involved in these election cases. He said, well, wait a minute, that's all true, and I'm a judge. And I can't not be a judge. I'm not just here to be a member of a 7-person legislature. And he was the deciding vote. There were actually some of the other conservative judges in Wisconsin who were more sympathetic to some of the claims the campaign was making. And it was Justice Hagedorn who was the deciding vote, and he wrote the majority opinion in the last case from there. One of the judges in the Pennsylvania case, the Third Circuit judge, as I mentioned, was Brooks Smith, who's the chief judge of the circuit. He's from Altoona, Pennsylvania. He's what used to be the DA there, and then he became a federal judge, a district judge, and then a circuit judge. Those of you who know Pennsylvania know that one of the cliches about Pennsylvania is you have Pittsburgh in the west, and you have Philadelphia in the east, and you have Alabama in between. And Judge Smith is from Alabama. He's from the Alabama part of Pennsylvania. But, he's somebody who I admire enormously because in all of the dealings I've had with him over the years, he's somebody who really gets this notion of a judicial culture as being an important thing. And being a judge is something you take seriously, and you aspire to live those values out in your daily life. And he was the one who actually gave me the title for this talk. He said, "The center held. The courts came through." And, he got the hate mail, he got the late night phone calls, he got the people threatening him, which is an unfortunate trend that has happened around the country because of social media. It's so easy. It's really easy to be brave when you're sitting in your bedroom and can type something. I'm not saying that judicial appointments don't matter. I'm not here to say that all judges are great and, you don't get to be mad at them and you don't get to be critical. I think judges need to be subject to criticism. I think there needs to be robust debate about what judges do and about the law. There's a lot of ways that the law is not equally fair to everyone. But that said, I think there's something good here, and appointments matter because you may feel that the values of a particular nominee are more in line with your own, and in a close case they're going to matter more. And I think that's an absolutely correct thing. And you can see cases that have infuriated people on both sides. I mean, there's people who are mad about Roe versus Wade. There's people who are mad about Citizens United. It's just, that's the nature of our system. But I think that there's something to feel good about in our structure, that we have a very robust and very independent judiciary. And I've had the privilege of traveling all over the world. We aren't the best at everything. There are things I think we could do a lot better, but one of the things we're really good at is being independent. And I think this election was a tremendous stress test of the independence of our judiciary, and I think it came through brilliantly. And that was the point I wanted to leave with you, and I think I'm ready for questions.
Judge Fogel, thank you very much for your comments. And yes, we have a number of very interesting questions, and I hope we can squeeze in as many as possible. You mentioned Roe versus Wade. Can you comment on what you think the probability is that the new Supreme Court could overturn Roe v. Wade?
I think it is more likely that they will continue to limit its applicability. Yes, it's possible, particularly with the current composition of the court, that they could overrule it. I think it's certainly more possible than it's been ever. But what has tended to happen instead is that as the states have imposed restrictions on reproductive rights, that the court has been more receptive to those restrictions. They've defined what the effects of those restrictions is on the basic right that Roe recognizes. They've given the states more leeway, and that's what I expect is going to continue.
You also made reference to Bush v. Gore very briefly. Do you think that the Supreme Court was politically swayed in reaching that decision?
In Bush versus Gore?
Yes.
I think this is the point I was making about how your background matters and your orientation matters. I don't think that it was clearly and unambiguously just putting their thumb on the scale. But I think the case was close enough and complicated enough and unique enough that the way people saw the facts was very much influenced by their background and their orientation. This is something I've spent a lot of time teaching people about, that, in an evidence-based system, the same fact may look different to different people. The significance of a fact, the salience of a fact may be different to different people. And I think my take on what happened in Bush versus Gore is that 5 of the justices felt that what was going on in the Florida courts was too chaotic. It was not even-handed enough. It was denying equal treatment to people in different parts of the state. And the other 4 justices said, well, that's not the point. We just want to make sure we get all the ballots counted and find out who actually won the election. So they're looking at the same facts, but they're looking at those facts through different lens. Now, the kind of lens somebody has is going to reflect a lot of things, including who they are, where they came from, what their who their friends are, what their who they are as people. And there are a bunch of cases, and I've used them in doing design of courses on decision making, where the way you see a fact depends a whole lot on how you grew up and where you grew up and what kind of experiences you've had in your life. And no, I don't think, and maybe I'm being too charitable, but I don't think so. I don't think Bush versus Gore was just 5 Republican voters saying we got more votes than you do. I think they had a rationale for it, but the rationale reflected the differences between those justices and the other 4.
Let me turn to voting rights. There's been a lot of litigation regarding voting rights. There's a case pending in the Supreme Court right now, Branovich, I believe is the pronunciation.
Yeah.
What are your comments on the voting rights litigation?
Wow. Well, it's very important. Shelby County, which was the case that basically eviscerated Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Very, very significant case. And, for people who they say conservatives or pro-life folks look at Roe versus Wade as a low point. I think there's a lot of people on the other side of the divide who see Shelby County as a real low point. It really has to do with the extent to which people recognize the impact of structural inequality. And this is a controversial concept. I think the majority in Shelby County simply said, well, that was then and this is now, and we're not living in the Jim Crow era anymore, and so we shouldn't have, as they describe them, preferences for certain kinds of voting rights claims based on things that happened in the past. People who look at things through the lens of structural inequality say, well, wait a minute, you can't do that. I mean, the whole nature of structural inequality is that it's structural. It doesn't have anything to do with whether people have good intentions or not. I mean, we had slavery for 250 years, and we had Jim Crow for another 100 years after that, and there are residues from that in terms of voting practices that in certain places need to be called out and dealt with in a different way. So this is one of those instances where somebody's perspective, growing out of their life experience, their experience of, in this case, I think structural inequality, makes a difference. I mean, I personally am not going to make any bones about it. I mean, I think those cases were wrongly decided because we obviously are still greatly affected by structural inequality. But there's people who disagree with me, and there's people who disagree with me whom I respect. So it's just, that's the nature of the process. Now, as far as what's going to happen with voting rights, I am not optimistic about the Supreme Court being an engine for expanding voting rights. I think it's going to have to come through Congress, and I think that's a heavy lift, but I think that's where it has to happen.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left, and if we do it expeditiously, let's try to squeeze in 2 more questions. One is it time to revisit lifetime appointments for the Supreme Court?
Well, there's been some really interesting scholarship on this. There's a group of people who've sort of coalesced around the idea of an 18-year term, one 18-year term for every justice. That gives justices a long tenure. It gives every president 2 appointments. And it would certainly discourage the practice of appointing justices who are 20 years old. So I think there's a lot to think about there, but it's a proposal that I have found attractive for the reasons that I just said. There's also a debate as to whether you'd have to amend the Constitution to do that. And I don't think that's clear whether you would or you wouldn't. I mean, if you just kind of came right out and said that Supreme Court justices have an 18-year term, I think you probably would have to amend the Constitution. I think there might be ways to have them appointed for life, but then change their assignments after a certain period of time. I think that's the kind of thing that's being discussed.
All right, final question, perhaps a little lighter note. There's been some commentary that the former president's lawyers, his legal team, were perhaps not the sharpest tools in the shed. Do you think the outcome would have been any different if the president's representation had been better?
Well, as we say in court, that assumes facts not in evidence, Jim. I think there were people that could have represented the president who chose not to do so for ethical reasons. I think there were efforts made to get some reputable election lawyers involved in those cases, and they wouldn't do it because there was no evidence to support the claims that would allow them to meet their ethical obligations under the federal rules. Under Federal Rule 11, you have to certify that you believe the claims have merit. And I think that was one of the problems they had with finding lawyers who would be more effective. I think had they found those lawyers, they might well have been more effective, but that's a circular argument because the reason that they didn't find the lawyers was because they didn't have the evidence.
All right, Judge Fogel, thank you very much for your comments. Thoughtful as always. It's been a pleasure seeing you again. And let me turn it back to President Fernando.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Judge Fogel. Nice to see you again. Looking only slightly older than when you left San Jose for Washington.
A little grayer, and it's great to see you too, Fernando.
Yeah. Glad to have you back in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And thank you for this wonderful program, very enlightening. We've made a contribution, the Rotary Club has, on your behalf, on behalf of all of our program speakers, to our city forest, a nonprofit which will plant 46 shade trees in East San Jose to combat heat islands, climate change, and improve our neighborhoods. I wonder, can you stay for a few minutes after we close our formal part?
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Next week, our speaker will be Cassie Kiefer, speaking on Secret San Jose. Cassie Kiefer is a San Jose-based communications consultant who wrote the book Secret San Jose, a guide to the weird, wonderful, and obscure. Her articles have been featured in numerous national magazines and on the website of the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, where she's been a contributing writer. She has a master's degree in urban and regional planning from UC Irvine and worked in policy and communications for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and several other agencies. She's grateful the pandemic has given us all a time to stay close to home and learn more about our community. So tune in next week. And to paraphrase my favorite immigrant governor, hasta la vista, Rotarians, the Zoom meeting is formally stands adjourned. So back to you, Judge Fogel. Jim, you've got some additional questions for him?
Yes, I do. We look here real quickly. One question was, what do you think of politicians who attack judges personally and professionally?
Well, I think they're being really irresponsible. I think attacking decisions on some kind of a principled basis is fine. I mean, I think the First Amendment protects that. You can say that a decision is short-sighted, or a decision is unfortunate, or a decision lacks compassion or realism or whatever. I mean, I think those are fair game when you're talking about a decision. If you can think of something about the decision itself that warrants criticism. I think what happens though is that it gets really personal, and the thing is, it's not. It has effects that are really quite serious. I mean, this is a problem. The work I'm doing now in my institute with judges around the country is that, especially social media attacks. That if once somebody goes off on you and then it goes viral, you can start getting just really hateful stuff directed at you in very large numbers very quickly. And it can lead to death threats. It can even lead to actual attacks. There was a judge in New Jersey who lost her husband, a judge in Chicago who lost her mother and husband a number of years ago. And maybe the people who carried those things out were had issues of their own. But the point is, when you create an environment where you can attack judges personally, that's just not a healthy environment. And I think politicians who feed that environment are not serving the public very well.
Thank you. One of the themes underlying all of the post-election litigation is states' rights versus the federalist system that we have. do you think there is a probability that we are going to have a movement towards states' rights in constitutional litigation?
Well, I do. And it's interesting. It's kind of a paradox. If you go back to the 50s and the 60s in the civil rights era, there was a states' rights response to that. That was largely people who didn't like the way the law was going. They didn't like the civil rights legislation. They didn't like integration, things like that. I think now actually it's a bit of a reversal that with we'll have to see. I mean, now that we have a more liberal administration than the last one, but certainly we're going to have a conservative Supreme Court for a long time, and even the circuit courts are going to be largely conservative for a long time. That some folks who are in what we call blue states may find that they'd rather do what they can do under state constitutions and under state law to achieve the things they want to achieve. So I think the same principle of what the federal government can regulate and what should be left to the states is still going to be contested. It's just that the players are going to be on different sides.
All right. Final question, and this may be a little bit repetitive of the question you answered about the voting rights. But one interesting phenomena that has happened since the election is state legislators putting in a wide variety of voter suppression bills. The one I liked the best was the Georgia bill that people in line couldn't be given cups of water while they were waiting to vote. What do you think the fate of these various voter suppression will be under this Supreme Court? How sympathetic
I think
the court going to be?
Sympathetic may be a little bit strong. I think they're going to be reluctant to intervene. They have pretty much, the conservative majority has pretty much said if the state legislature does it, that they're not going to get in the way, and that actually the cases where they did get in the way, there were some earlier cases in Wisconsin in the primary, and they showed some interest in one of the Pennsylvania cases, even in the general, although they ultimately didn't take it up. But the question was, can courts, can election boards, can people other than the legislature do things like make accommodations for COVID? And what the conservatives were saying was, no, the legislatures of the states decide what the rules for the elections are, and you can't change them on the fly. So I think there's a lot of deference that's going to be given to the legislatures. And I think to overcome the kinds of legislation you're talking about, there either needs to be a National Voting Rights Act, or there has to be some showing that these particular restrictions are discriminatory. And that's a hard sell. And both of those are hard sells. I mean, because the Voting Rights Act, you've got the filibuster and the discrimination, with the court's current view being that it has to be purposeful and overt, and not just disparate impact, that it's going to be hard. So I think a lot of this stuff is going to succeed, absent some kind of national legislation.
I have one more question, and that is, what type of judicial nominees do you think we can expect to see from the Biden administration, both for Supreme Court openings, should he have an appointment there, but more importantly for the courts of appeal and the district courts?
Oh, I think they're very committed to greater diversity. I think we're going to see not just diversity, not just demographic diversity, not just more people of color, more women, but I think they're going to look for people with diverse backgrounds. They're going to look for people who've been public defenders, people who've been legal aid lawyers, people who've had unconventional practices. In the federal courts in particular, that's not been true. I mean, certainly in my cohort, most of us were either former state court judges, or we were former prosecutors, or we were former big firm lawyers. Those were the three major pathways. And I think that there's a real commitment on the part of this administration to open that up.
Judge Fogel, thank you very much. Fernando, I have to depart.
Thanks,
Okay,
everyone.
and thank you very much, Judge Fogel. I'm thrilled to have you back back home where you belong.
It's nice to see you. It's nice to see all of you.
So
Thanks
thank you very much for a wonderful presentation.
a lot.
Well, if he's got one more minute, I have a question.
Okay,
The
go ahead.
Republicans, the Republicans in the Senate were very well prepared to put forward a whole slate of judges for openings where we had not been as effective in filling positions in prior administrations.
Yes.
They banged them through.
Yeah.
Is there that kind of preparation being done now?
Absolutely. If anything, they got out ahead even before President Biden was inaugurated. His White House counsel was already reaching out to senators to get prospective nominees. So I think they see that lack of attention from the Obama administration as having really been a problem, and I think they're approaching things quite differently.
Oh, great.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
All right. Thank you. See you, everyone.